bring Harry and Meghan back into the fold? And what on earth was Sarah Ferguson planning to do with the late Queen's corgis?
Something is about to explode, and this time it's not coming from Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. It's coming from someone who has been watching quietly, sitting on years of untold moments, and now reportedly reaching a breaking point. Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, is suddenly at the center of whispers that are shaking the royal narrative to its core, because insiders claim she isn't just speaking, she's about to flip everything we thought we knew completely upside down. And here's where it gets intense, because this isn't random gossip floating in the air. This entire storm has been building for years, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until now it feels like every hidden conversation, every private frustration, every moment that never made it to cameras is lining up, ready to come out all at once. You have to understand something very clearly. Fergie is not just another royal voice. She's someone who lived inside the system, then outside it, then somewhere in between, watching both sides with a perspective that nobody else has. That alone changes everything, because while Harry and Meghan have been telling their story through interviews, documentaries, carefully structured narratives, Fergie has been silent, watching, listening, absorbing, and now the silence itself is starting to feel suspicious, because people close to the situation are asking one simple question: why now? And the answer might be more explosive than anyone expected. Let's talk about the first bombshell, the one that quietly sits at the heart of everything, the moment that shaped public opinion from the very beginning, the bridesmaid dress incident. You remember how it was told. You remember how it was framed. You remember the emotional weight it carried when Meghan revealed her version. But here's the twist that's suddenly resurfacing. What if that story was never the full story? Because behind closed doors, during those tense pre-wedding days, there were more voices, more witnesses, more layers than would ever reach the public. And here's where things get dangerously interesting. Princess Eugenie was right there, in the middle of it all, moving between spaces, hearing things, seeing reactions, picking up details that never became headlines. And if those details were ever shared casually, privately, in the kind of conversations daughters have with their mothers, then Fergie isn't just guessing what happened. She might actually know. And suddenly, that one moment, the one that shaped sympathy, that defined sides, that influenced millions of opinions, doesn't look so simple anymore. Because if even a fraction of a different version exists, it doesn't just adjust the story, it destabilizes it. Now take a breath, because the second bombshell doesn't just shake perception, it touches something far more serious. The staff situation. The complaints that surfaced, then vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. The whispers that never fully turned into answers. People remember the headlines, but what they don't remember is how quickly everything went quiet. Too quiet. And silence in situations like that, it's never empty. It's filled with things that weren't said. Because those who were inside that environment weren't just observing, they were experiencing. Conversations happened, opinions formed, tensions built. And once again, there's that same connection, Eugenie. Proximity, access, exposure to perspectives that never became official statements. Which means if those perspectives traveled even slightly beyond that circle, Fergie may have heard versions of events that were never meant for the public. Now imagine what happens when those hidden versions start to surface. Not as rumors, not as anonymous leaks, but as something coming from someone who actually sat within that world. It changes the tone instantly. It changes how people listen. It changes what feels believable. And then comes the third bombshell, and this is where things start to feel less like drama and more like strategy. The timeline. The real timeline. Because what if the decision to step away didn't happen when everyone thought it did? What if it started earlier? Much earlier. Because there have always been quiet hints, subtle clues, little inconsistencies that didn't quite match the official narrative. Moments that, when looked at closely, suggest planning, preparation, conversations that began before the public was ever aware. And if that's true, if the shift was already in motion while everything publicly appeared stable, then the entire story of sudden departure takes on a completely different meaning. And again, there's that same thread running through everything. Access, closeness, trust. Eugenie wasn't distant. She wasn't outside the circle. She was part of it. Which means if anything was said, even casually, even vaguely, even in passing, those details didn't just disappear. They existed. They lingered. And they may have found their way into the one place nobody expected them to go, Fergie's memory. And now, as all these pieces begin to line up, the rejected book deals, the whispers of new opportunities, the sudden increase in attention, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like timing. Perfect timing. Because when someone with that level of proximity, that level of knowledge, and that level of nothing left to lose reaches a certain point, silence stops being being an option. It becomes pressure. And pressure always finds a way out. But here's where everything takes a darker, more complicated turn. Because the fourth bombshell isn't just about personal stories or emotional moments, it's about connections, social circles, the kind of overlapping worlds that, when looked at too closely, raise questions nobody wants to answer. And the deeper you go into that part of the story, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about who was around when it happened and who might still be connected to it. Everything is starting to feel like it's building towards something bigger, something that hasn't dropped yet, but is clearly moving in that direction. The signals are there, the tension is rising, and the one person sitting at the center of it all is no longer invisible. She's watching, she's waiting, and if even one of these secrets breaks into the open, it won't just create headlines, it will force people to question everything they thought they understood about this entire saga. And the most unsettling part? This might only be the beginning, and just when it feels like the tension has already reached its peak, this is where the situation becomes even more unpredictable. Because the fourth bombshell isn't something that can be easily explained away or emotionally reframed. It sits in a space that is far more sensitive, far more layered, and far more dangerous if even a fraction of it begins to surface publicly. And that is the world of overlapping social circles, the kind that quietly connect powerful people behind the scenes while the public only ever sees the polished version on the surface. And what makes this so unsettling is not what has been confirmed, but what has been avoided, what has never been directly addressed, what has lingered in silence despite everything else that has been openly discussed over the years. Because when you look back at how outspoken Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been about their experiences, how they have detailed emotional conflicts, institutional tensions, personal grievances, and very specific moments involving multiple members of the royal family, one absence becomes impossible to ignore. One silence becomes louder than anything that was actually said, and that silence revolves around Prince Andrew. Because despite the global attention surrounding his controversies, despite the fact that his situation has been one of the most publicly damaging episodes for the royal family in modern history, despite everything that was said in interviews, documentaries, and memoirs, not a single direct criticism, not a single detailed comment, not even a passing remark was ever directed toward him. And when people notice something like that, when they see such a deliberate gap in an otherwise open narrative, it doesn't answer questions, it creates them. And in that kind of environment, perception becomes everything, not just what is said, but how it is received, how it is compared, how it is weighed against everything that came before it. And this is where the real risk lies for Harry and Meghan. Because once that process begins, once people start looking at the narrative as something to analyze rather than something to accept, it becomes almost impossible to return to a single, unified version of events. Because doubt, once introduced, doesn't disappear. It lingers, it grows, it reshapes how every new piece of information is interpreted. And this is exactly why the possibility of Fergie stepping forward feels so significant, because she doesn't need to reveal everything to change everything. She doesn't need to present a complete alternative story to shift perception. All it takes is enough detail, enough credibility, enough proximity to make people pause, to make them reconsider, to make them ask questions they hadn't asked before. And once that happens, the entire dynamic of the conversation changes permanently. And yet, despite all of this movement, despite all of these signals, despite the growing sense that something is building beneath the surface, nothing official has been announced, no major project has been confirmed, no interview has been scheduled, no release date has been revealed, and that silence, that waiting period, only adds to the tension, because it creates the feeling that something is coming, something that hasn't been fully revealed yet, something that is still being positioned, still being prepared, still waiting for the exact moment when it will have the maximum possible impact. And that moment, when it arrives, will not feel slow or gradual. It will feel sudden, overwhelming, like everything shifting at once. Because that is how stories like this move when they finally break into the open. They don't trickle out quietly. They hit all at once. They dominate attention. They force reactions. They create headlines that demand answers before anyone has time to fully process what is happening. So now the entire situation sits in this strange, suspended state where everything is quiet on the surface but charged underneath, where the pieces are already in motion but the final move hasn't been made, and the one person at the center of it all is no longer just a background figure. No longer just a peripheral voice. She has become the potential trigger for a shift that could reshape how this entire royal saga is remembered. And the question that continues to hang in the air, the one that keeps building with every passing day, is no longer whether she has something to say, it's whether she is ready to say it. And when she does, which part of the story will hit hit first? Which detail will spark the biggest reaction? Which revelation will force the strongest response? Because once that first piece lands, everything else will follow faster than anyone expects. And when that happens, there will be no going back to the version of the story that existed before. Because once multiple truths begin to compete in the same space, the idea of a single controlled narrative disappears completely, replaced by something far more unpredictable, far more complicated, and far more difficult for anyone involved to contain. And that is exactly why all eyes are now quietly shifting toward Fergie. Because whether she speaks tomorrow, next month, or not at all, the possibility alone has already started to change the conversation. And sometimes, in stories like this, the possibility is enough to set everything in motion.